Kicked out at 16. Orphan in dusty gas station. What before is the leaf together? Kicked out at 16. Orphan in dusty gas station. What before is the leaf together? Kicked out at 16. Orphan in dusty gas station. What before is the leaf together? Kicked out at 16. Orphan in dusty gas station. What before is the leaf together? Kicked out at 16. Orphan in dusty gas station. Orphan, dusty gas station. What he found inside changed everything. They call it aging out. It's a funny term, like you're a block of cheese that's been left on the counter too long. One day, you're a problem for the state. The next, you're just a problem. For me, that day was my 16th birthday, the day I got the letter and the key. If you've ever felt completely lost, like the world had a set of rules you were never given, then you'll understand what comes next. Stick with me on this, and if you feel that connection, consider subscribing. We're building a place here for stories that matter, for people who've had to find their own way. The day started like any other at the Northgate Youth Residence, which was a fancy name for a brick building that smelled faintly of disinfectant and quiet desperation. Breakfast was powdered eggs. My birthday was acknowledged with a lumpy cupcake and a chorus of off-key singing from the other guys, most of whom were just counting down their own days. I was Leo, just Leo, no last name that mattered anymore. 2 years at Northgate, 4 years in foster care before that. The details blur into a sad, gray fog. My caseworker, Mr. Henderson, was a man who seemed permanently tired. He had a stack of files on his desk that represented a forest of broken family trees, and I was just another leaf he had to sweep off the porch. He called me into his office at 3 p.m. The clock on the wall ticked, each click a tiny hammer against the silence. "Leo," he started, not looking up from a manila folder. "Happy birthday." I mumbled a thank you. He finally looked at me, his eyes weary. "So, you're 16. You know what that means?" It wasn't a question. In this state, at 16, you could petition for emancipation if you had a viable plan for self-sufficiency. It was a loophole, a way for the system to wash its hands of you a little earlier. Most of us didn't have a plan. We had nothing. "I guess," I said, my throat feeling tight. I was expecting a lecture, a list of trade schools, maybe a brochure for the military. I was not expecting him to slide a thick, cream-colored envelope across the desk. It looked ancient, like something from a movie. My name was typed on the front. Leo, no last name. "This arrived for you, from a law firm," Henderson said, leaning back in his chair, which squeaked in protest. "It came with this." He dropped a single tarnished brass key on top of the envelope. It was heavy, ornate, with the letter M stamped into the head. I just stared at it. A key to what? A locker? A post office box? "It's about your grandfather," Henderson said, his voice softer now. "Arthur Morgan, your mother's father." The name hit me like a stone. I hadn't heard it in years. My mom used to talk about him, but her stories were fragmented, broken by memory and sadness. He was a ghost, a myth. He'd disappeared from our lives when I was a toddler. My mom always said he'd just left. No note, no call, just gone. And now, a decade after my mom was gone too, he was reappearing as a law firm and a key. I picked up the envelope. The paper felt thick, expensive. I broke the seal. The language inside was dense, full of words like bequeathed and estate and next of kin. I had to read it 3 times before the meaning sank through the fog of my confusion. Arthur Morgan was dead. He had died 6 months ago, and in his will he had left me everything he owned. It wasn't much, according to the letter. A piece of property, a business long since defunct, a gas station in a town I'd never heard of called Sparrow Creek, Wyoming. My entire inheritance was a plot of land and a dusty building hundreds of miles away. According to the state, this constituted a viable plan for self-sufficiency. I had a roof, theoretically, over my head. I was no longer their problem. The papers were already filed. I had a bus ticket, one way, and $100 in cash from a discretionary fund. I was free. I was 16, alone, and I owned a gas station I'd never seen, left to me by a ghost. I looked at Henderson, my mind reeling. A gas station? He just shrugged, a gesture that said it all. It wasn't his problem, not anymore. I walked out of his office, the key heavy in my pocket, the letter clutched in my hand. The other boys watched me go, their faces a mixture of envy and pity. I was getting out, but I was heading into a bigger, colder world, with nothing but a key and a dead man's mystery. The weight in my pocket felt less like a key, more like a stone pulling me down into the unknown. The bus ride out of the city was a blur of gray concrete, slowly giving way to tired-looking suburbs, and then finally, blessedly, to open fields. I had a window seat. For the first hour, I just watched the buildings I'd known my whole life shrink and disappear, until the city was just a smudge of pollution on the horizon. The bus smelled of stale air and the faint, sweet scent of a cleaning agent that wasn't quite strong enough to cover up years of human travel. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, the vibration of the engine, a constant, low hum that seemed to match the buzzing in my own head. A gas station. What was I supposed to do with a gas station? In my mind, I pictured something from an old movie. Gleaming red pumps, a friendly attendant in a clean uniform, a little bell that dinged when a car pulled in. But the letter from the lawyer, a Ms. Albright, had been carefully worded to manage my expectations. The property has not been in operation for over a decade, she'd written. It is being transferred to you as is, with all attendant responsibilities and liabilities. Liabilities. That was a word that worried me. It sounded like debt. It sounded like trouble. Before I left, Ms. Albright had called me. Her voice was crisp, professional, and devoid of any real warmth. But there was a strange sort of patience in it. She explained the basics. My grandfather had no other living relatives. The will was ironclad. The property, officially Lot 7 on the county map, was now mine. She made it very clear what my options were. Leo, she'd said, her voice crackling slightly over the phone in Henderson's office. I want you to understand the situation. The land itself has some value. A development company, Westward Expansion, LLC, has a standing offer on the table for all properties along that highway. It's not a large sum, but it's enough to give you a start. $10,000. You could take it, find an apartment in a nearby town, finish school. It would be a clean break. $10,000. To me, it sounded like $1 million. It sounded like a fortune. It sounded like safety. What's the catch? I'd asked, because in my life, there was always a catch. There was a pause on the other end of the line. The catch, she said, her voice losing a bit of its professional sheen, "is that your grandfather refused that same offer, and dozens like it, for years. He was insistent on holding on to the property. He had me write this will 5 years ago with the specific instruction that you, and only you, would inherit it upon your 16th birthday. He wanted you to have the choice. The choice. The easy 10,000 or the difficult, unknown path of a derelict gas station. A choice left to me by a man who had chosen to be absent for my entire life. I felt a surge of bitterness. Why now? Why, after all this time, was he suddenly inserting himself into my life from beyond the grave? What right did he have? "There's something else you should know," Ms. Albright had continued, pulling me from my angry thoughts. "The property comes with significant back taxes owed, about $3,000. If you take possession, that debt becomes yours. If you sell to the development company, they've agreed to absorb the debt as part of the sale. So, your 10,000 would really be more like 7. The numbers swam in my head. It was all too much. All I heard was debt and trouble. "Why didn't he just pay the taxes?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "I can't speak to your grandfather's motivations, Leo. I was just his lawyer. But he was a man who did things his own way. The choice is yours. The offer from Westward is good for 30 days. You have a bus ticket. Go see the place. Then call me." The call had ended, leaving me with more questions than answers. Now, on the bus, the landscape was changing. The flat plains were starting to ripple, to swell into low hills covered in sagebrush. The skies seemed bigger out here, a vast, empty blue that was both beautiful and terrifying. It made me feel incredibly small. I pulled out the key again. The tarnished brass was warm from being in my pocket. M for Morgan. My name. A name I hadn't used in years. Leo Morgan. It sounded strange, foreign. I was a ghost, inheriting from a ghost. I spent the next 2 days on that bus, watching America scroll by my window. I slept with my head against the glass, my jacket balled up as a pillow, the key a hard lump against my ribs. I ate cheap sandwiches from station vending machines and tried not to think too much. But the thoughts came anyway. Memories of my mom, her face soft and sad when she'd talk about her father. "He was a good man, Leo," she'd say, her voice distant. "Just complicated. He loved the open road, said it was the only place he felt free." Was this gas station his cage or his kingdom? And what did he expect me to do with it? As the bus finally pulled into the tiny, wind-swept depot of Laramie, the closest major town to Sparrow Creek, I felt a knot of pure fear tighten in my stomach. A local shuttle, more of a beat-up van, would take me the rest of the way. I was at the edge of the map, the edge of my old life. The choice was waiting for me, sitting under the big Wyoming sky, covered in a decade of dust. I just had to decide if I was brave enough, or stupid enough, to turn the key. The shuttle van to Sparrow Creek rattled like a tin can full of bolts. The driver, a man with a face like a leather map and a name tag that read Gus, grunted a hello and then didn't say another word for the entire 40-mile drive. That was fine by me. The silence gave me time to watch the landscape unfold and to let the reality of my situation sink in. We left the modest outskirts of Laramie behind and plunged into a world that was all earth and sky. The road was a strip of cracked black asphalt cutting through endless plains of pale green and yellow grass. The mountains stood like distant, jagged blue walls on the horizon. There were no other cars, no signs of life, save for a few lonely cows and the occasional hawk circling high overhead. It was a beautiful, desolate, and intimidating place. I felt like an astronaut stepping onto a new planet. Gus finally broke the silence as the van slowed. "That'll be it up ahead." He pointed a thick finger through the dusty windshield. I followed his gaze and saw it. It wasn't much. A low, flat-roofed building set back from the road, a rusted canopy stretching over two skeletal-looking gas pumps. A tall signpost stood beside it, but the sign itself was gone, leaving only a blank, peeling frame. Morgan's Stop. That's what Ms. Albright had said it was called. It looked less like a stop and more like a final resting place for forgotten things. The van crunched to a halt on the gravel shoulder. "This is you," Gus said, already looking impatient to leave. I grabbed my single backpack from the seat beside me. "Thanks," I mumbled. He just nodded, and as soon as I was out and the door was slammed shut, the van did a three-point turn and sped back the way we came, kicking up a cloud of dust that coated me in a fine layer of Wyoming soil. A welcome party of one. The dust settled, and I was left in profound silence. The only sound was the wind, a low, mournful sigh as it swept through the tall grass. It was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the land. The air was thin and cool, and smelled of sage and dust and something else, a faint, metallic tang of old oil. I stood there for a long time, just looking. The building was made of concrete blocks, painted white a long time ago. Now the paint was peeling in long strips, revealing the dull gray underneath. The windows were boarded up with weathered plywood. The door was a solid slab of wood, painted a faded red. It looked impenetrable. This was it, my inheritance, my viable plan for self-sufficiency. It looked like a joke, a cruel, cosmic joke. I walked slowly towards it, my boots crunching on the gravel drive. The gas pumps were relics from another era, their glass faces clouded and cracked, the hoses dry rotted and hanging like dead snakes. Weeds grew thick and tenacious through cracks in the concrete. I ran a hand over the rusted metal of one of the pumps. It felt cold, rough. I could almost hear the ghosts of cars that had stopped here, families on vacation, truckers on long hauls. A whole world that had existed and then vanished. My hand went to my pocket, to the key. It felt heavier than ever. This was the moment of truth. Was I going to turn around, hitch a ride back to Laramie, and call Ms. Albright to take the $10,000? The thought was incredibly tempting. $7,000, really. Enough to get a room somewhere, a fresh start with no history and no responsibilities. It was the sensible choice, the easy choice. But then I looked at the faded red door. My grandfather had wanted me to have this choice. A man I never knew, a man who had apparently abandoned his own daughter, had made sure that I, his grandson, would stand right here, at this exact spot, with this key in my hand. Why? It was the one question that wouldn't leave me alone. The wind picked up, rustling the plywood on the windows, making a sound like a deep, tired breath. I had to know. I walked up the single concrete step to the door. The lock was a heavy, old-fashioned brass plate, tarnished to a deep brown, matching the key perfectly. My hand was shaking slightly as I pushed the key into the lock. It slid in smoothly, a perfect fit. I hesitated for a second, took a deep breath that was mostly dust, and turned. There was a loud, grating click that echoed in the vast emptiness, the sound of a tomb being opened. I pushed. The door resisted at first, swollen in its frame. I put my shoulder into it and pushed harder. With a groan of tortured wood, it swung inward, opening into darkness. The air that rushed out to meet me was thick, stale, and heavy. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed for a very, very long time. The smell of trapped memories, of decay, of time itself. Stepping over the threshold was like stepping into the past. The darkness inside was almost total. The only light was a single, dusty shaft slanting in from the open door, illuminating a blizzard of dancing dust motes. I stood just inside, letting my eyes adjust, the heavy wooden door slowly swinging shut behind me with a final, booming thud that made my heart jump. Now the only light was a thin sliver under the door. I was plunged into a cave of shadows. I fumbled in my backpack for the small flashlight I'd bought at a truck stop, my fingers clumsy with a sudden, irrational fear. The click of the switch seemed deafening, and a weak yellow beam cut through the blackness. I swept the light across the room. It was the old service station store. A long wooden counter ran along one wall, covered in a thick, velvety layer of dust. Behind it, empty shelves lined the wall, a few faded labels still visible. Soda, chips, oil. A vintage cash register sat on the counter, its keys yellowed, its drawer slightly ajar. On the floor in front of the counter, a wire rack for postcards had fallen over, its contents fanned out like a losing hand of cards. I picked one up. It was a picture of the very station I was standing in, but in its prime. The paint was fresh, the pumps were gleaming, and a classic car was parked out front. A sign above the door read, "Morgan's Stop, last gas and best coffee for 50 miles. It was a different world. I continued my exploration, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the silence. The beam of my flashlight slid over a dusty glass-fronted refrigerator, a calendar on the wall, frozen on May 2008. Over a decade ago. That was around the time my mom got sick, the time everything started to fall apart. A knot of coldness formed in my gut that had nothing to do with the chill in the air. This place wasn't just abandoned, it was frozen in time, as if someone had just walked out one day and never come back. A door behind the counter led to a small back room. This was clearly the office. A heavy wooden desk sat against one wall, a swivel chair beside it, its leather cracked and peeling. Papers were scattered across the desktop, stiff and yellowed with age. An old rotary phone sat in the corner, a layer of dust so thick it looked like it was covered in gray fur. Everything was coated in that same uniform layer of dust, a shroud that had settled over a life. I ran my fingers over the desk, leaving clean streaks in the grime. This was his desk, my grandfather's. This is where he sat, where he worked, where he left from. I felt like an intruder, a grave robber. But this was my inheritance, my mess to sort through. I went to the desk, my flashlight beam dancing over the clutter. Old invoices, receipts, a coffee mug with a faded logo. And in the center of the desk, placed deliberately, was a metal lockbox. It was a simple, gray, fireproof box, the kind you buy at an office supply store. It wasn't locked with a key, but with a simple combination dial. It looked newer than everything else in the room, cleaner. There was less dust on it, as if it had been placed here more recently than 2008. Or maybe it had been wiped clean. My heart started to beat a little faster. This felt important. I tried to open it, but it was locked tight. I looked for a combination, a number scrawled on a piece of paper or on the desk blotter. Nothing. Frustration pricked at me. Another locked door, another puzzle left by a man who specialized in them. I sat in the dusty chair, the springs groaning under my weight. The beam of my flashlight created a small, lonely circle of light in the overwhelming darkness. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. What was I doing here? This was insane. I should be on a bus, heading towards that $7,000, towards a life that made sense. I leaned back, my head hitting the wall behind the chair. Thump. But it wasn't a solid thump. There was a slight hollowness to the sound. I sat up, intrigued. I ran my hand along the wood-paneled wall behind the desk. It all seemed solid. I knocked again, listening closely. Thump, thump, thud. There, a different sound. I traced the area with my fingers. It felt like the rest of the wall, but when I pushed, one of the panels moved. It wasn't a secret door like in a movie. It was just a loose piece of paneling. I pried at it with my fingers, and a section of the cheap wood came away in my hands, revealing a small, dark cavity in the wall. My flashlight beam pierced the darkness, and I saw it. Tucked inside was a small, leather-bound journal and a single, thick envelope sealed with wax. And sitting on top of the envelope was a small, folded piece of paper. I reached in, my fingers trembling slightly, and pulled them out. I unfolded the piece of paper first. On it, written in a tidy, blocky script, were 3 numbers. A combination. I looked from the paper to the metal box on the desk. It had to be. This was it. A deliberate trail of breadcrumbs. He hadn't just left. He had planned this. He had planned for me to be here, to find this. I put the journal and the sealed envelope on the desk, my hands moving with a new sense of purpose. I turned to the lockbox, my flashlight held steady in my other hand. The numbers on the dial clicked softly as I turned them. Left, right, left. I lined up the final number and pulled the latch. It opened with a soft click. I lifted the lid. The contents were not what I expected. There were no jewels, no gold bars, no deed to a secret fortune. Inside, there were just 2 things. The first was a stack of $100 bills, neatly wrapped in a paper band. I counted it. $10,000. Exactly. The second thing was a letter. It was in an envelope identical to the one I'd found in the wall. My name, Leo, was written on the front in the same neat script. I sat there, staring at the cash and the letter. This was the money from the developer's offer, or an amount equal to it. Why? Why would he leave me the money here after making me jump through all these hoops? It made no sense. I picked up the letter, my hands feeling strangely numb. I broke the seal. The letter inside was several pages long, filled with that same careful handwriting. It began with 2 words that knocked the breath out of me. My boy. My boy, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are here. And for that, I am both sorry and deeply proud. I'm sorry for the life you've had to live to get to this point. I know I haven't been there. I know you and your mother thought I abandoned you. I let you think that. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I need you to understand it was a lie. A necessary one. A lie to keep you safe. I had to stop reading. My eyes were burning. I stood up and paced the small office, the flashlight beam cutting frantic, jerky patterns in the dark. The words echoed in my head. A lie to keep you safe. What did that mean? Safe from what? I forced myself to sit back down, to pick up the letter again. My hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. Your mother, my sweet, brave girl, the letter continued, never knew the whole truth. I couldn't burden her with it. The short version is this. I made a mistake a long time ago, before you were born. I got involved with some bad people. Not gangsters or criminals in the way you see in movies. Worse. They were quiet, smiling men in suits who bought up land and lives, who held debts like weapons. I borrowed money from them to expand this station, to give your mother a better life. It was a foolish, prideful mistake. The economy turned, I couldn't pay, and the debt grew. It grew into something monstrous, something that they could use to control me, to own me. They didn't want the money anymore, Leo. They wanted this land. It sits on a strategic point for a new highway they've been planning for 20 years. My little gas station was a thorn in their side, the one piece of the puzzle they couldn't get. I looked around the derelict station, at the dust and the decay. This place, this forgotten ruin was important. They tried to force me out, threats, intimidation, but I'm a stubborn old mule. Then your mother got pregnant with you, and they saw a new kind of leverage. They made it clear that if I didn't sign the land over, the debt would pass to my daughter, and one day to her son. They would own you before you were even born. They would have a hook in you for the rest of your life. I couldn't let that happen, so I made a deal. I couldn't pay the debt in money, so I paid it in time. I agreed to work for them, off the books. I became their ghost, their caretaker for other properties they were acquiring. I traveled, I fixed things, I kept my mouth shut. In exchange, they froze the debt. They agreed that it would die with me, as long as I stayed away from you and your mother, as long as I never tried to pass the property on. It was a life sentence. I had to disappear from your life to save it. I dropped the letter onto the desk. A strangled sob escaped my throat, raw and loud in the silent room. I cried. I cried for the grandfather I'd never known, the man I had hated for abandoning us. I cried for my mother, who died thinking her father didn't love her. And I cried for the little boy who grew up in the system, feeling worthless and alone, never knowing that he was being protected by a ghost. It was too much. The neat narrative of my life, the one where I was an unwanted cast-off, had just been blown to pieces. I wasn't abandoned. I was saved. After a few minutes, the wave of grief subsided, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and picked up the letter again. There was more. I followed you from a distance, Leo. I got reports. I knew about the foster homes. I knew about Northgate. Every day was a torment, knowing I couldn't step in, couldn't pull you out of it. But the deal was the deal. The only thing I could do was prepare for the day the deal ended, for the day I was gone. That's what this place is. It's not an inheritance, boy. It's a choice. In that box, you found $10,000. It's my life's savings, the money I scraped together on the road. It's the same amount Westward Expansion will offer you for the land. They're the same people, Leo, just with a new name. They'll come sniffing around. They'll assume the son of a runaway will take the quick cash. You can. Take the money, get out of here, and never look back. There's no shame in it. You'd be free. That's one kind of freedom. The letter paused there, as if for effect. I could feel the weight of the next words before I even read them. But there's another kind of freedom, the harder kind, the kind you have to build yourself. This station is a wreck, I know that. I had to let it fall apart to make it look worthless. I stopped paying the property taxes so it would seem like a liability. It was all part of the camouflage. But the bones are good. The well draws clean water. The tanks in the ground are sound. I lined them myself. In the wall, you found another envelope and a journal. The envelope contains the truth, all of it. Names, dates, copies of the original loan documents I lost. Everything you would need to expose these people, to show what they've been doing in this valley for decades. It's a bomb, Leo, and if you set it off, they will come for you. Not with threats, but with lawyers and injunctions, and all the power that money can buy. They will try to crush you. I glanced at the thick, wax-sealed envelope on the desk. A bomb. He had left me a bomb. "The journal," the letter concluded, "is for you. It's full of my notes on how to fix this place, how to prime the pumps, how to patch the roof, how to make the best damn coffee for 50 miles. It's a roadmap if you choose to take that road. So that's the choice. The cash in the box or the key in your hand. An easy escape or a hard fight. I can't make it for you. A man has to choose his own cage. I chose a life on the run to buy your freedom. What you do with it is up to you. Whatever you decide, know this. I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second. Your grandfather, Arthur." I carefully folded the letter and placed it on the desk next to the stack of money. The air in the room was thick with the weight of it all. Freedom. He'd used that word over and over, but this didn't feel like freedom. It felt like the heaviest burden I'd ever carried. I had a choice between a quiet life with a little money or a war I was in no way equipped to fight, for a place I didn't know, in the name of a man I'd never met. I was 16 years old. I shouldn't be making choices like this. I should be worried about homework and girls and learning how to drive. Instead, I was sitting in a derelict gas station in the middle of nowhere with a ghost's legacy in my hands. The silence of the station pressed in on me, and for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt expectant. It was waiting for my answer. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat in my grandfather's creaking office chair, the flashlight beam growing steadily weaker, casting long dancing shadows that looked like accusing fingers. I read the letter again, and again, and again. Each time, the words burrowed deeper into me, rearranging the entire history of my life. My anger at him, the solid foundation of my lonely childhood, had crumbled, replaced by a profound and aching grief. He wasn't a villain. He was a tragic hero in a story I never knew I was a part of. The $10,000 sat on the desk, a neat, solid block of possibility. It was the sensible path. It was the voice of Mr. Henderson, of Ms. Albright, of every rational adult I'd ever known. Take the money, get an apartment, get a GED, be normal, don't make waves. I could almost taste the freedom it offered, the freedom of anonymity, the freedom from this dusty, complicated past. Then my eyes would drift to the other two objects on the desk, the thick sealed envelope and the leather-bound journal, the bomb and the roadmap. They represented the other path, the path of resistance, the path of reclamation. It was a path that led directly into conflict with powerful, faceless people. It was a path that required work, grit, and a kind of faith I wasn't sure I possessed. It was, in short, an insane choice. As the flashlight finally flickered and died, plunging the room into absolute blackness, I felt a panic I hadn't felt since I was a small child, lost in a grocery store. The darkness was total, suffocating. I was alone, truly alone, with this monumental choice pressing down on me. I felt my way out of the office and into the main store area. The sliver of moonlight under the front door was a beacon. I stumbled towards it, my hands outstretched, and pushed it open. The night air was crisp and cold. I stepped outside, my breath pluming in front of me. The sky, away from any city lights, was an impossible explosion of stars. I had never seen anything like it. The Milky Way was a brilliant, shimmering smear across the velvet black. It was vast and ancient and utterly indifferent. And yet, standing under it, I didn't feel small. I felt connected. This was the sky my grandfather had looked at, This was the wind he had felt on his face. I walked the perimeter of the station, my feet crunching on the gravel. I touched the cold metal of the pumps. I ran my hand along the peeling paint of the walls. It wasn't just a building. It was a story. It was a sacrifice. It was the last piece of my family I had left. Could I really sell it? Could I sell his memory for $7,000? Could I let the men in suits win after he had spent his life keeping them at bay? I sat on the concrete step, the same step I had hesitated on just hours before, and I cried again. But this wasn't the raw, shocked grief from before. This was something else. It was the grief of letting go. I cried for the easy life I could have, the simple path I was about to turn my back on. I cried for the boy who just wanted to be normal. Because in the cold, clear, star-dusted night, I knew what I had to do. There was no other choice. Not for me. Not for the grandson of Arthur Morgan. The decision settled over me not like a weight, but like a shield. It was terrifying, but it was also clarifying. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to things happening to me. I was choosing. When the sun finally began to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and orange, it felt like the first day of a new world. My world. I went back inside. I found a box of matches in one of the desk drawers. They were dry, and the first one struck lit up with a satisfying flare. I lit a dusty old kerosene lamp I found in the corner, and its warm, golden light pushed back the shadows, making the office feel less like a tomb and more like a sanctuary. I put the $10,000 back in the lockbox. I closed the lid. It wasn't my money. It was his. It was the station's. It was for the fight. Then I picked up the journal, the road map. The leather was soft and worn. I opened it to the first page. The first entry was dated just a few months ago. "Leo," it began. "If you're reading this, start with the well. The pump needs to be primed. Here's how you do it." I spent the entire morning reading that journal. It was part manual, part diary. He wrote about fixing the septic tank, about the best way to patch the roof, about which suppliers in Laramie were honest and which were crooks. But woven between the practical advice were his thoughts, his memories. He wrote about my mother, how she loved to sit on the counter and draw as a little girl. He wrote about his wife, my grandmother, who had planted the scraggly, half-dead rose bush I'd seen by the side of the building. He painted a life here, a real, tangible life, full of love and work and struggle. He was giving me not just a place, but a history I could choose to be a part of. The sealed envelope, the bomb, I left on the desk. That was a fight for another day. Today's fight was simpler. It was about survival. It was about turning this place from a ruin into a home. I found a set of old coveralls in a locker in the back. They were too big, but they were sturdy. I put them on. I felt like a soldier putting on his uniform. I found his old tools, heavy and solid, coated in a fine layer of rust, but still sharp. I spent the rest of the day following the journal's first instructions. I found the well pump. I cleaned the filter. I primed it, just like he said, pouring bucket after bucket of water I'd hauled from a nearby stream. I worked until my back ached and my hands were raw. Finally, I flipped the switch. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just a groan. My heart sank. But then a shudder, a cough, and a stream of rusty, sputtering water burst from the pipe. It slowly cleared until it was running clean and cold and pure. I cupped my hands and drank. It was the best water I'd ever tasted. It tasted like victory. That evening, as the sun set, a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize pulled off the highway and crunched to a stop in my driveway. A man in a tailored suit got out. He was holding a phone to his ear and looked around the property with a dismissive air. He looked at me, covered in dirt and grease, and a small, smug smile played on his lips. He thought he knew who I was. He thought I was just another lost kid, ready to be bought. He had no idea. The man in the suit strode towards me like he owned the place. He was all polished shoes, expensive cologne, and an easy confidence that set my teeth on edge. He ended his call with a clipped, "I'll handle it," and slid the phone into his pocket without taking his eyes off me. "Leo?" he asked. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. He already knew. "You must be the heir." He said the word heir like it was a joke. I just stood there by the now gurgling well pump, my hands filthy, my grandfather's oversized coveralls hanging off my frame. I didn't say anything. I let him fill the silence. "Tough break about your grandfather," he said, his tone utterly devoid of sympathy. "He was a character. My name is Mr. Cross. I'm with Westward Expansion. I believe your lawyer mentioned us." "She did," I said. My voice was hoarse from dust and disuse. "Good. Then you know we have a standing offer on this charming piece of real estate." He gestured dismissively at the station, a look of distaste on his face. "Frankly, it's a blight. We're trying to develop this whole corridor, bring some life back to the area. Your grandfather, bless his stubborn heart, couldn't see the big picture. But I'm sure a smart young man like you can." He smiled, a flash of perfectly white teeth. It was the smile of a predator. $10,000, clean and simple. We handle the back taxes, the paperwork, all of it. You walk away with a fresh start. What do you say? This was it, the moment of choice, made real. It was no longer a philosophical exercise in a dark room. It was a man in a suit standing on my gravel, offering me the easy way out. I thought of the letter. I thought of my grandfather, spending his life on the run to give me this exact moment. I thought of my mother, dying without knowing the truth. I looked Mr. Cross directly in the eye. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the space between us with the force of a slammed door. The smile on Cross's face faltered for a fraction of a second. He clearly wasn't used to hearing that word. "I'm sorry, I don't think I heard you correctly." "I said no," I repeated, my voice stronger this time. "The property is not for sale." Cross let out a short, humorless laugh. "Kid, let's be realistic. What are you going to do with this dump? You're 16 years old. You have no money, no resources. This place is a ruin. In 6 months, the county is going to seize it for back taxes anyway. I'm offering you a lifeline. Take it." "I'll pay the taxes," I said, the words surprising me with their conviction. "With what?" he sneered. "You going to start pumping gas from those museum pieces?" I didn't have an answer for that, not a real one. But I didn't need one. All I needed was the truth. "My grandfather didn't sell," I said. "I'm not selling either." Cross's face hardened. The friendly facade evaporated, revealing something cold and ugly underneath. "Your grandfather was a fool who died with nothing. Don't make the same mistake. This isn't a negotiation. That offer is more than generous. It's charity. It expires in 30 days. If you come to your senses, call your lawyer. But don't expect us to be so generous a second time." He turned to leave, his jaw tight with anger. "One more thing," I said, and he paused, turning back slightly. "You tell your bosses. You tell them Arthur Morgan's grandson says hello." I don't know where the words came from. They just appeared, fully formed. They were my grandfather's words, spoken through me. For a moment, a flicker of genuine surprise, maybe even fear, crossed Cross's face. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. Not as a lost kid, but as something else, an inheritor, an obstacle. He got back in his SUV without another word and drove away, leaving another cloud of dust in his wake. As the dust settled, I was left with the echo of my own words. The fight had begun. I had fired the first shot, and I had no idea what came next. The weight of it all, the sheer impossibility of what I had just done, threatened to crush me. But then I looked at the station, my station, silhouetted against the brilliant colors of the sunset. It wasn't just a building, it was a fortress. It was my home, and I was going to defend it. The days that followed Mr. Cross's visit blurred into a routine of grueling, satisfying work. The fear and uncertainty were still there, a constant low hum in the back of my mind, but I pushed them away by focusing on the task in front of me. The journal was my Bible, my grandfather's voice guiding me through every step. I started with the basics, making the place livable. There was a small apartment attached to the back of the station, a single room with a tiny kitchen and a bathroom. It was in even worse shape than the store, with peeling linoleum and a thick layer of grime on every surface. I spent 3 days just cleaning. I hauled out garbage. I scrubbed floors and walls with water from the well until my knuckles were raw. I found an old mattress that was surprisingly free of mold, dragged it outside to air out in the sun, and beat the dust out of it with a broom handle. It wasn't much, but when I finally laid my sleeping bag on it that first night, in a room that was clean because I had made it clean, I slept more soundly than I had in years. The work was a teacher. I learned the anatomy of the station, its strengths and weaknesses. I learned the language of old buildings, the groan of settling foundations, the whistle of wind through a loose window frame. I learned about myself, too. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, that my body could ache and protest, but still get up the next morning and do it all again. I learned that I was patient, that I could spend an entire day on a single, frustrating task, like rewiring a faulty light switch, and feel a surge of pure joy when it finally flickered to life. My world shrank to the boundaries of this small plot of land. My only companions were the journal, the tools, and the ghost of my grandfather. Some days, the loneliness was a physical ache. I'd be tightening a bolt or patching a crack and suddenly be overwhelmed by the silence, the vast emptiness of the landscape around me. In those moments, the temptation to just walk away, to hitch a ride to Laramie and disappear, was immense. But then I'd open the journal. "The generator is tricky," he had written. "You have to sweet-talk her a little, but she's a reliable old girl." Or, "Remember to check the roof flashing before the first snow. Water is your enemy." His words were a constant, comforting presence. He was there, in the margins, on every page. He was teaching me not just how to fix a building, but how to build a life. Slowly, painstakingly, the station began to change. I replaced the boarded-up windows with new panes of glass I bought with a little of the lockbox money on a supply run to Laramie. The first time sunlight streamed into the dusty store, It was like the place took a breath after holding it for a decade. I cleared the weeds from the concrete islands, swept the gravel drive, and gave the pumps a coat of rust-proof paint. They were still relics, but now they looked like cared-for relics. People started to notice. The few cars and trucks that passed on the highway would slow down, the drivers staring. One afternoon, a dusty old pickup truck I'd seen go by a dozen times finally pulled in. An old man with a face as weathered as the landscape and a gimlet eye climbed out. He wore a greasy flannel shirt and a John Deere cap. "You the one fixin' up this old place?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble. "I am," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of a greasy hand. He looked me up and down, then looked at the work I'd done. He nodded slowly. "Arthur's grandson, ain't you?" "Yeah," I said, surprised. "How'd you know?" "Got the same stubborn set to your jaw," he said with a wry smile. "Name's Earl. I run the hardware store in town. Knew your granddad for 30 years. He was a stubborn old coot, but he was a good man." He looked around again. "He'd be proud of this." The words hit me with unexpected force. Pride. It was a foreign concept. Earl reached into the bed of his truck and pulled out a heavy-duty caulking gun and a box of sealant. "Figured you could use this," he said, thrusting it into my hands. "For the windows. Winter's coming. No charge. Call it a welcome to the neighborhood." I tried to protest, to offer to pay, but he just waved me off. "Pay me back when you're up and running," he said, and with another nod, he got back in his truck and drove away. I stood there holding the caulking gun, a lump in my throat. It was more than just caulk. It was an acceptance. A hand reached out across the void. Earl was the first. A few days later, a woman from a nearby ranch dropped off a box of fresh vegetables and a loaf of homemade bread. A trucker stopped to give me a crate of bottled water. They were small gestures, but they were everything. They were the first threads of a community, a net I hadn't realized was being woven around me. They weren't just helping me, they were honoring Arthur's memory. They were choosing a side. And I realized the fight wasn't just mine, it was theirs too. They had all been living in the shadow of westward expansion, watching their neighbors get bought out, their valley slowly carved up by men in suits. My little gas station had become a symbol, a line in the sand. Arthur Morgan's last stand was becoming Leo Morgan's first, and I wasn't fighting alone. The first snow came in late October, a fine white powder that dusted the plains and clung to the mountains. I had managed, with Earl's advice and the journal's guidance, to get the station buttoned up for winter. The roof was patched, the windows were sealed, and the old furnace in the apartment, after a day of tinkering and cursing, had roared to life. I had a small stockpile of firewood, a pantry stocked with canned goods, and a growing sense of cautious optimism. The station was still a long way from being operational, but it was now, undeniably, a home. The cold weather brought a new kind of quiet. The trickle of supportive locals slowed as people hunkered down for the winter. The highway traffic dwindled to almost nothing. I was more isolated than ever, but I wasn't lonely. I had the work. I spent the short, cold days indoors, tackling the interior of the store. I sanded and refinished the long wooden counter until the grain shone. I scrubbed the old glass-fronted refrigerator, and to my astonishment, it hummed to life when I plugged it in. I even started cleaning the old postcards I'd found, carefully wiping away the grime of years. They were little windows into a bygone era, a happier time. In the long, dark evenings, I sat by the furnace with the kerosene lamp and the sealed envelope, the bomb. I still hadn't opened it. I knew that once I did, there would be no turning back. The quiet, focused work of rebuilding would be over, and the noisy, messy work of fighting would begin. Was I ready? I ran my thumb over the wax seal, Arthur's initial, M, pressed into it. He had trusted me with this. He had trusted me to know when the time was right. The 30-day deadline on Westward's offer came and went. There were no more visits from Mr. Cross, no threatening letters, just silence. It was a nerve-wracking silence, the kind that comes before a storm. I knew they hadn't forgotten about me. They were waiting for me to fail, for the winter to break me, waiting for the county to post the tax delinquency notice on my door. That was the real deadline, the real ticking clock. I had managed to save most of the $10,000, using it only for essential supplies. After buying food and materials, I had just over $7,000 left. The back taxes were $3,000. Paying them would leave me with enough to survive the winter, but not much else. It would be a huge gamble, betting everything I had on this place. One snowy afternoon, the phone rang. I had found the old rotary phone in the office, and on a whim had called the phone company. Using the money from a few odd jobs I'd done for Earl, I had gotten the line reconnected. The sound of it ringing was so alien and shocking that I dropped the wrench I was holding. I picked it up, my heart pounding. Hello? Leo Morgan? The voice was familiar, crisp, professional. Ms. Albright, I said. I was beginning to wonder if a bear had gotten you, she said. There was a hint of something in her voice, something that wasn't quite humor, but wasn't purely business either. I'm still here, I said. So I see. I'm calling because the tax delinquency notice is about to be publicly posted. Westward Expansion has already put in a preliminary bid for the property at the county auction. Of course they had. I have the money for the taxes, I said. I can wire it to the county. There was a pause. Leo, she said, and her voice softened, losing its lawyerly edge. Are you sure about this? I have to tell you, as your legal counsel, that paying those taxes is a significant risk. It ties you to the property. It makes walking away much, much harder. I'm not walking away, I said. I see. Another pause. Your grandfather would be, well, he would be difficult about it, I'm sure, but I think he'd be pleased. The words were a quiet validation, a balm on my frayed nerves. There's something else, she said, her voice turning serious again. Westward has filed a motion to contest the will. I felt a cold knot of fear in my stomach. What? On what grounds? They're claiming your grandfather was not of sound mind when he wrote it. They're claiming he was under duress. They're going to argue that his eccentric behavior, letting the station fall apart, disappearing for long periods, is proof. They're positioning themselves as the responsible party, the ones who can make the land productive again. It was exactly what Arthur had warned me about. They weren't fighting with threats anymore. They were fighting with lawyers. Can they do that? I asked, my voice small. They can try, she said. It's a long shot, but they have deep pockets. They can drag this out in court for years, drain you of every penny you have, and then some. They're trying to break you, Leo. The silence stretched between us, filled with the hum of the phone line and the howling of the wind outside. This was the moment. This was the time. Ms. Albright, I said, my voice steady. I have something here, something my grandfather left me. I think it's time I showed it to you. I took a deep breath, walked over to the desk, and with the phone tucked under my chin, I broke the wax seal on the bomb. The pages inside were filled with my grandfather's neat script, detailing years of quiet corruption. The war had just moved to a new front. The contents of the envelope were everything my grandfather had promised and more. It was a meticulous, damning record. There were copies of the original loan documents, the ones with the predatory terms. There were signed affidavits from 2 other local landowners who had been forced out by similar tactics, men who had been afraid to speak up but had trusted Arthur. There was a detailed timeline of his off-the-books work for Westward's parent company, complete with dates, locations, and the names of the executives who gave him his orders. And at the very bottom of the stack, there was a small audio cassette. I took the envelope and its contents to Laramie the next day, braving the snowy roads in an old truck Earl insisted I borrow. The meeting with Ms. Albright took place in a small, anonymous conference room that smelled of old coffee and stress. I laid the papers out on the polished table between us. She read them in silence, her face impassive, but I could see a muscle twitching in her jaw. She spent a long time on the affidavits, her lips a thin, hard line. When she was done, she stacked the papers neatly and looked at me. "This is," she started, then stopped, searching for the right word. "This is a bombshell." "My grandfather called it a bomb," I said. "He was an astute man," she replied, a newfound respect in her voice. "This changes things, Leo. This isn't just a defense anymore. This is a counterattack." We played the cassette tape on a small player she kept in her office. The quality was poor, full of static, but the voices were clear enough. It was a recording of a phone call between my grandfather and a man he identified in his notes as John Cross, Sr., the founder of the company, Mr. Cross's father. They were discussing the deal. Cross Sr.'s voice was smooth, patrician, and utterly ruthless as he laid out the terms of Arthur's exile. He explicitly mentioned the debt passing to my mother and her future children. It was the smoking gun. It was irrefutable proof of duress. Ms. Albright listened to the entire tape without moving, her eyes closed. When it clicked off, she opened them, and they were shining with a cold, hard light I hadn't seen before. "They wanted a fight," she said softly. "Now they have one." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering. Ms. Albright filed a countersuit against westward expansion, citing blackmail, racketeering, and a pattern of predatory business practices. The affidavits from the other landowners gave the suit class action potential. The story, leaked to a hungry reporter at the state newspaper, became a local sensation. David versus Goliath in Sparrow Creek. Suddenly, I wasn't just some kid fixing up a gas station. I was the face of a rebellion. The community, which had been offering quiet support, now became vocal. A Friends of Morgan's Stop fund was started at Earl's hardware store. People dropped off cash, checks, groceries. The woman who brought me bread organized a bake sale. The trucker who gave me water started telling every driver he met to swing by and see what was happening. They weren't just supporting me anymore. They were investing in the idea that one person, one small place, could stand up to the relentless tide of corporate greed. The fight took me away from the station more than I liked. There were depositions, meetings with Ms. Albright, interviews with the press. I hated it. I hated the sterile offices, the endless questions. I felt like a pawn in a game much bigger than myself. But every time I returned to the station, covered in the grime of the city, the sight of it, my home, standing solid and true against the prairie sky, recentered me. It reminded me what I was fighting for. It wasn't about the money or the land anymore. It was about the principle. It was about honoring the sacrifice of a man I barely knew, but was coming to understand completely. It was about proving that a home is more than just property. It's a legacy. It's a story. And some stories are worth fighting for. The climax came not in a courtroom, but in Ms. Albright's office. Westward, facing a PR nightmare and a mountain of evidence, had finally blinked. They offered to settle. Ms. Albright, Cross's lawyer, and I sat around the same polished table. This time, Mr. Cross was there himself. He looked thinner, his tailored suit seeming to hang off him. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a weary resentment. Their offer was laid out. They would drop their contest of the will. They would pay the back taxes on my property. They would make a significant contribution to a victims fund for the other landowners in the class action suit. And they would offer me a personal settlement of $250,000. All I had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop my countersuit. It was an incredible offer. It was life-changing money. It was everything they thought I wanted. I looked at Ms. Albright. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. The choice was mine. I looked at Mr. Cross, at his tired, defeated face, and I thought about my grandfather, alone on the road for all those years. "There's one more condition," I said. Cross looked up, surprised. His lawyer bristled. "The settlement is non-negotiable." "This isn't for me," I said. "It's for him. I want a public apology to my grandfather, Arthur Morgan. I want your company to state on the record that he was a man of integrity and that you wronged him." Cross stared at me, his mouth open. The idea was clearly absurd to him. Apologize? To a dead gas station owner? His lawyer started to protest, but Cross held up a hand, silencing him. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Understanding? Resignation? He had lost. He knew it. He just nodded, a single, tired motion. "Done," he whispered. I signed the papers, but I never took the settlement money. I had it all directed to the Victims Fund and to a new trust, the Sparrow Creek Community Trust, dedicated to helping local businesses and landowners fight back against predatory developers. I walked out of that office with nothing more than what I had when I walked in: the key to the station, my grandfather's journal, and a home. But I was the richest man in the world. The months after the settlement were the best of my life. The lawsuit was over, the threat was gone, and all that was left was the work. And for the first time, the work felt joyful, not desperate. With the title to the property secure and the back taxes paid, I could finally start to dream a little bigger. The community, buoyed by the victory, rallied around me. Earl organized a barn raising for a gas station, and a small army of volunteers descended on the property. They helped me patch the last of the roof, paint the exterior a brilliant white with a bold red trim, the station's original colors, and even install a new, vintage-looking sign that read simply, "Morgan's." A local electrician helped me rewire the whole building, and a plumber helped me install a new water heater. I tried to pay them, but they all refused, echoing Earl's words from months before. "Pay us back when you're up and running." My life found a new rhythm, one dictated by the seasons and the needs of the station. I woke with the sun, worked until my muscles ached in the best possible way, and fell asleep each night in my own bed, in my own home, with a profound sense of peace. I officially reopened Morgan's on the one-year anniversary of my arrival. It wasn't a gas station. The old tanks were sound, but the regulations and costs to get them operational were astronomical. Maybe someday. For now, it was something else. It was a coffee shop and a small general store. The old glass-fronted cooler was stocked with cold drinks. The shelves were filled with snacks, local crafts, and basic supplies for truckers. And on the beautifully refinished counter, A large, gleaming coffee machine hissed and steamed, producing what I and a growing number of loyal customers considered the best coffee for 50 miles. The first customer was Earl. He strode in, looked around at the clean, bright space, and a slow, wide grin spread across his face. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Arthur would have loved this." He ordered a black coffee, paid with a crisp dollar bill that I immediately taped to the wall behind the counter, and sat at one of the small tables I'd set up by the window. Soon, others followed. Ranchers on their way to town, truckers looking for a break from the highway, tourists who were intrigued by the clean, retro-looking station in the middle of nowhere. They came for the coffee, but they stayed for the stories. Morgan's became a gathering place, a hub for the community that had helped build it. People would linger, swapping news and gossip, their conversations a warm hum that filled the space where silence had once reigned. I was no longer just the owner. I was the proprietor, the caretaker. I was Leo from Morgan's. I had a place. I had a name. One afternoon, a familiar-looking black SUV pulled into the lot. My heart gave a small jolt, but I stood my ground behind the counter. Mr. Cross got out. He looked different. He was wearing jeans and a simple jacket, not a suit. He looked older, more tired, but less angry. He came inside, the little bell I'd installed over the door giving a cheerful jingle. He looked around the bustling little shop, at the people laughing and talking, at the wall of photos I'd started putting up, pictures of the station's restoration, of Earl and the other volunteers, and one old, faded photo of a young Arthur Morgan standing proudly by his gleaming gas pumps. "It's different," Cross said, his voice quiet. "I'll have a coffee," he said, sliding a $5 bill onto the counter. "Black." I poured him a cup. He took a sip, and his eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. "That's good," he admitted. He looked at me, a strange, searching look in his eyes. "My father died a few months ago," he said, out of the blue. "The lawsuit, it took a lot out of him." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. "He was from here, you know," Cross continued, staring out the window at the plains. "Grew up on a ranch not 10 miles from this spot. He spent his whole life trying to get away from it, and then he spent the rest of his life trying to own it." He finished his coffee in silence, placed the empty cup on the counter, and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "My father was wrong about your grandfather," he said, not looking at me. "He wasn't a fool. He was just from a different time." And then he was gone. I never saw him again. That was 5 years ago. I'm 21 now. The station is thriving. I've even been able to hire a couple of local kids to help out during the summer. The Community Trust has helped 3 other local businesses get off the ground. The valley is still quiet, still beautiful, but it doesn't feel as fragile as it once did. It feels resilient. Sometimes, late at night, after the last customer has gone and the shop is quiet, I'll sit in the office, in my grandfather's chair, and look at the key. It sits on the desk, next to his journal. It's not just a key to a building anymore. It's a reminder that inheritance isn't about what you're given, but what you choose to build. It's a reminder that home isn't a place you find, but a place you make. And a reminder that sometimes the most valuable things are the things you have to fight for. My grandfather gave me a choice. He gave me a ruin and a roadmap. He gave me a past to uncover and a future to build. He taught me that you can't run from who you are or where you come from. All you can do is stand your ground and make it a place worth defending. Looking back on it all now, it's funny how the worst day of your life can also be the first day of your real life. That day I was kicked out, the day I became a problem for myself instead of the state. I felt like my story was over. I was 16, had $100 in my pocket, and my only worldly possession was the ghost of a gas station in the middle of nowhere. It felt like an ending, but it wasn't. It was a beginning disguised as a ruin. And I think a lot of us have those moments. Maybe you've had one. A moment where the life you thought you had, or the life you were supposed to have, just crumbles, and you're left standing in the rubble with no idea what to do next. You look at the pieces, and all you can see is loss. All you can see is what's broken. But that's not the whole picture. If this story has taught me anything, it's that those broken places are where you get to start building. It's where you find out who you really are. My grandfather, Arthur, he understood that. His life was full of broken pieces, broken promises, a broken family, a broken down station. But he didn't throw the pieces away. He held on to them. He hid them. He saved them. He knew that someday, someone might be able to put them together in a new way. He left me a choice, but it was more than that. He left me a set of instructions, not just for fixing a building, but for fixing a life. The first step was just to show up, to stand your ground when every instinct is telling you to run. The next step is to start cleaning, to sweep away the dust and the neglect, to let the light in. It's slow, painful work, and you do it alone at first. But if you keep at it, something amazing happens. People start to notice. They see you trying. They see you building something where there was nothing, and they want to be a part of it. They bring you a caulking gun, or a loaf of bread, or just a word of encouragement. They remind you that you're not as alone as you think you are. And that's what this is all about, isn't it? Finding our ground, building our home, and realizing that home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's the connections we make. It's the community we build. It's the story we choose to be a part of. My story started with a key to a derelict gas station, but it became a story about second chances. It became a story about fighting for what you believe in. It became a story about how the deepest legacies aren't made of money, but of love and sacrifice. And that's a story worth telling. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for listening. This story is my inheritance, and sharing it with you feels like the last, most important part of the puzzle. If anything in this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt lost, if you've ever had to build your own home, if you've ever been given a second chance, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to this channel. We're creating a space here for stories like this, for the quiet heroes and the hard-won victories. And I want to hear from you. In the comments below, tell me about a time you had to rebuild. Tell me about the Morgan stop in your own life. I promise you, I will read every single one. Because your stories matter. We are all just trying to find our way, and maybe, by sharing our maps, we can help each other get home. Thank you for being a part of my community. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got coffee to make. The sun is coming up over Sparrow Creek.